Okay, it's 12:20. Let's get going. Everybody can hear me okay? I will share my screen. Let's see how that goes. How do I share my screen? That's always, oh, share screen here, sorry. I haven't used Zoom in a while. And but before I get started, are there any questions? I think we have gotten a little bit out of that, but I want to return to that. So any questions about anything HDF, HDF5? Let's see, were there any important announcements last week? Nothing comes to mind. I mean, we have, some of you might have noticed, we updated the forum software, the discourse software to the latest version. It has a fresh look now. I hope it is faster, at least it feels faster to me. And other than that, I don't remember if there were any other important events. But yeah, any questions? If not, then I'll just crack on. Okay, I'll crack on. Today's topic, again, yeah, today, 5 Tuesdays in a month, I get the privilege of doing the 5th. And I promised that today we would take a look at sort of some of the AI assistants that everybody talks about. And I've chosen, I mean, I could have done GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT, but I decided to go with ChatGPT, sort of less is more, in the sense that it's not so important to talk about as many tools as possible, but let's just pick one and sort of dive in a little bit. So I'm using ChatGPT here. This is the GPT version 4. Depending on how far we get today, you see I can ask only 25 questions every 3 hours. So I tried to throttle down my thirst for knowledge in the morning. So we'll see how well I did. But let's just dive in. And this is really, I think, what I find exciting about this is, especially for users of HDF5, I think there is a lot here. Sure, you can Google example programs and so forth, but I think this is definitely a much more direct path that is not free of error and confusion and everything, but it's a much easier path to find examples and even sort of get you started developing some code for you, helping with your development. And that's what I want to look at. And then I also want to show you something that I found. I was a little surprised that it actually could do that, but we'll get there. Actually, let me, I better set a timer for myself here, because otherwise I just forget time. Let me set 25 minutes. Okay, right. So what can ChatGPT do for us? Well, let's just start with a simple example. I have a little cheat sheet here. So let's say, for example, I asked ChatGPT to write me a C program that creates an HDF5 file containing 1 million groups, and I want to distribute them across, just to pick a silly number, 1,234 subgroups. And I also want to get a sense of the elapsed time. Okay, let's do this. And ChatGPT says, hey, I'd be more than happy to do this for you. Okay, so it points out to me that Chrono is a C++ library, and that's cool. So, and you would expect, yeah, it would just write sort of a doubly nested loop, and then sort of create the, let's say, top-level subgroups, and then within those groups, create, yeah, these second-level groups, so to speak. And that looks, again, I'm not going to waste time here. I've tried, in some instances, the code compiles, in some instances it doesn't, but just sort of spot checking that as it spits out these things, this is very likely it will compile, it will do the right thing, and that's cool. Okay, so now you can sort of incrementally try refining that. So for example, I could ask it, well, I could ask it, for example, for a Python version of that. And let's also ask it to throw in some comments for us. And so here it's always surprising to see how concise compared to C a Python script can be. So yeah, it uses a nice with clause and sort of the ranges, but the structure is essentially the same: doubly nested loop and timers, and cool. And here's the printout of our time. Good stuff. But okay, so that was easy. Let's say the next time we might ask it, well, I want to use the latest file format version. So I can say modify the C program to use the latest file format version, although that's a little bit of a misnomer, but we're not going to get hung up on that here today. So let's see. It should see that, right, we need a file access property list, and we use H5P set libver bounds for that. And then it should just fill in that when it creates the file. Okay, so here's actually a first mistake. So we'll challenge it on that, because you see it created a file creation property list. However, H5P set libver bounds works with a file access property list rather than a creation property list. So this might be already a point where beginners might stumble. And yeah, but so let's just ask ChatGPT. Okay, I'll just let it ramble on here and finish. So are you sure that H5P, there might be a more direct way to ask it, but set libver bounds takes a file creation property list as its first argument. And oh yeah, okay, there's a little bit of confusion here. It takes a file access property list, not the end of the world. And so it recovers from that, and I'm sure the second time around it will get it right. So here's again, personally, I don't know. Of course, there is some randomness built into how it builds these completions, and yeah, I don't know if that's just for show, that it tries to correct itself sometime, or if that saves computational cycles or something. I really don't know much. I haven't looked into the inner workings of that, but okay, so that's pretty good. So now, again, things for beginners, you can read a lot of documentation. I'm going to say, how about using the core VFD? And I'm trying to stick sort of with the jargon or the parlance that people would use on the forum, or that's out there in the world in documentation that we have created. Or how about using the core VFD with the file? Let's see. So it tells us that this is using it entirely in memory. And okay, so it should modify that file access property list and basically do a set tuple core. And yeah, it does that correctly. And it sticks with the latest file format, and it's still a FAPL, file access property list. It also modified the file access property list. That's the last argument in H5F create, so that's good. And so yeah, there's a good chance that this will just compile and run. For some reason, it picked as the increment 1 to the 20 bytes 1 to the 20, what would that be? That would be, I think, 1 megabyte, because 1 to the 10, I think, is 1024, and 1 to the 20 would be 1024 times that. So, oh yeah, right. Initial, whether the file is closed. So actually, yeah, it also tells us that it set the last argument to 0, which is at the moment, it wouldn't be saving this file. It would just abandon the buffer. Good stuff. So one more thing on this before I'm going to switch to something else. Let's just use a more advanced feature, such as paged allocation, for example. We know that since, I forgot which version, 1.10.1, maybe we introduced paged file space management, and that would be a file creation property list. So let's see if we can get it to do that. So please modify the code to use paged file space management with a I don't know if it's picky, with a 4 MB page size. Let's see how that goes. Okay, page aggregation means that the space, right, set file space strategy is absolutely the right thing to do. And then file space page size is the right thing to set the page size. So I'm surprised that it picked up on that. I'm surprised in the following sense that, of course, I've tried this a few times, and because of the inherent, not randomness, but variation that gets injected into this, you don't get consistent answers. So had I saved all the conversations I had in the past, I could have shown you that, yeah, if I asked the same question here and today, I would get a varied answer. And let's just check one thing here, that so it correctly uses a file creation property list, because if you set the file space management strategy, you need a file creation property list, and it does that correctly. It's stuck with the access properties for the other two, the file format version and the core BFD. So again, there's a good chance that this will just run and behave correctly. Now let's look at something more complicated. So far, okay, certainly helpful. But let's try something more complicated. And I remembered something that Stephen Varga, who the creator of H5CPP, he wrote an interesting program at some point, because he was interested in sort of testing and pretty much randomizing the creation of HDF5 sort of group and data set structures. And there is a tool there, if you read the article on Wikipedia, but in a moment, I'm actually going to ask ChatGPT. There's a thing called a prefer sequence. And prefer sequences are, in a way, a mechanism for representing labeled trees as sequences. So here's, for example, here's an example. This is a labeled tree, and the corresponding prefer sequence is 4445. And I'm not going to, you can go here and read all about it. There is an algorithm where you can, given the tree, derive the prefer sequence, and then going back, given the sequence, you can create the prefer tree. And Stephen, the tree. And Stephen created a nice little tool that you can find in his GitHub repository called H5R&D, where he basically created a command line tool that creates such an HDF structure. And he actually did more. It actually also creates a visualization of this using GraphViz. So I thought, well, that's interesting. How about, I'm sure ChatGPT knows about prefer sequences. what if I asked ChatGPT to create an HDF5 file in which we sort of generate a group structure according to such a proof of sequence, or a label tree that corresponds to the proof of sequence. Because you see, the challenge is obviously ChatGPT would have to somehow make a connection between sort of the graph structures or tree structures commonly found in HDF5 files, and then the label tree that is associated with a proof of sequence. So is that earth-shattering? No, it's not, but it actually shows something interesting for my money. So if we come here, of course, I can ask ChatGPT, what is and I don't have an umlaut here on my key, but I'm sure it will understand that. So I can ask it what a proof of sequence, and it actually has an umlaut. That's great. And now it gives you pretty much what we just read on the, and I'm going to stop generating here because I don't want to waste time. A proof of sequence. So now let's ask it, for example, sort of, I would say, modify the C program to include a group structure, if I could spell, that corresponds to, and I'm going to copy the umlaut with that corresponds to the proof of sequence, and I'm just going to make one up here, 2, 3, 4, 7, 1, 6. Where I'm going to add to that, so I want a group structure like that, but then I want the leaf nodes, like in Stephen's example, I want the leaf nodes to be data sets. Okay, so where all leaf nodes are, let's say, 10 by 10 integer data sets. Okay, let's see what we get. Okay, so yeah, it can't stop talking about proof of sequences. Here's a modified, and okay, off the top of my head, I didn't say anything about the core VFD and what to do with the paged allocation. Oh, it's still sticking with the core VFD. That's beautiful. Latest file format. It hasn't forgotten about that. So that's one of the nice things in the later versions of ChatGPT, that it sort of, it has some context, so it keeps track of the sort of the instruction pointer, so to speak, in the conversation. And okay, so it creates some groups here and link the nodes according to the proof of sequence. Okay. Yes, that might work, but then for the leaf data set, exactly. So it picked up definitely that for the leaf nodes, we want data sets rather than groups. And oops, maybe we just reached some kind of timeout. I had to push continue creating. Oh, that's interesting. Why do we bother with, right, we have to know how many links there are. That's right, because if, yes, and so assuming that that program compiles and runs, I find that remarkable. I find that really remarkable. Because it goes beyond, it has on its own to, so to speak, discover that, label trees, there is some resemblance between that and the group structures that we can create in HDF5. and then just make the connection. And it does that completely. I mean, it might have peaked at Stephen's repository at some point, but so that's very interesting. Let's see. Of course, the same works with, I mean, yeah, all the other things, such as you can ask it to create chunk data sets and compact data sets and compression and all these things. So also, so let's just for a check, can you show me a Python version of this? And then also in this case, I think it might include comments already, but then you can ask it to it creates comments already. So if it didn't, then you could ask it to include comments with that, and then also we could modify it. Let's actually try this. We could try to modify it so that rather than hard coding the proof of sequence, we want the proof of sequence to be passed as an argument. Can you modify the Python script to take the, I'm going to stick with proof of sequence, take, accept the proof of sequence as a comment and an argument. Sometimes I'm not sure. Right, hard pause, that sounds like a plan. Right, and then it assembles the proof of sequence. Actually, yeah, my Python is a little rusty, but that looks like a clever way of using a lambda function with argparse. Yeah, it's just typing away, and I might be getting up close on my 25 queries for 3 hours, but right. Yeah, cool. Any other, is there something you want me to try, or reactions? I mean, to me, this looks like, yeah, I think when people talk about developers and jobs and AI and so forth, I think I forgot who coined the phrase that it's AI is not going to take away your job, but the developer that knows how to use these tools, that really commands the use of these tools, he or she will take away your job. And so I think it's certainly, I find it very helpful. I mean, how many times have I written silly examples, silly HDF5 examples, the same code over and over again? I'm not going to do that anymore. I have ChatGPT, problem solved. And okay, I'm still going to spot check it and see that it really does what it claims to do. And there are a few glitches here and there, but it can only get much better from here. But it's pretty good at this point. I mean, I have not prepared anything now. If you want to think about development, where you would like, you are developing a module, and then you would like to do testing and sort of create unit tests alongside, or present it with a piece of code. I actually tried that. If any of you has a piece of code that's not commented, we could use that to try and ask it to tell us what this piece of code is doing. But yeah, somebody asked something here in the chat. Okay, well, that could be tough. Can you create a common Lisp version of this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, Joe. And I think the same is going to be true for Emacs Lisp. But then what about Julia? Maybe it just uses Python interoperability in Julia. That would be clever. But no, this looks more like genuine Julia, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments? Maybe next time, of course, I think ChatGPT is nice to develop something incrementally. And speaking of Lisp, I mean, that's one of the things I've always liked about Common Lisp was that you had a REPL and you could sort of incrementally develop your code and sort of dynamically configure things. And the conversational style certainly is a gentle way, a more gentle way to finally arrive at something that you can then take away and refine on your own. But then if you have sort of a more lengthy description where you have, I mean, you can do that if you, maybe next time we can talk about GitHub Copilot. You basically would have at the top of the file a comment block in whatever language you are developing, and there you basically outline your goal. You say, this is what I would like to do in the following order. Then yeah, Copilot will just take it away from there, and that works pretty well. Robert is asking, do you think the HDF foreign function interface, oh, you mean for Common Lisp, for example, or other languages for Java? I think Java is getting a new FFI. Mm-hmm.
Yes, in general, it could be used for any language as FFI, but since it referred to the fact that the Common Lisp foreign function interface was not mature or very well developed, and it would be a significant undertaking. So I'm wondering, well, is that a job for ChatGPT?
I think it could be. It could be very well, because I'm trying to remember. I mean, I know a little bit what the CLFFI, the Common Lisp foreign function interface looks like, and yeah, I don't see. I mean, it has support for pointers and structures and types and all these things. And so, yeah, I mean, considering that it can make the connection between HDF group structures and labeled trees and proof sequences, I think, yeah, I can look into that. I mean, wouldn't it be nice, or in a way, a different kind of foreign function interface is what's that wrapper called that we used to use a lot to create wrappers for .NET and other languages. It escapes me now. Yeah, but these wrapping tasks, including, for example, the JNI, I don't know if Alan is here, but for example, for our Java interface, the GNI bindings that we are maintaining at the moment, could that be done by ChatGPT? Perhaps, although, yeah, if we get the Java whenever 19 foreign function interface, then I think that will be the end of the JNI because it's just low level and tedious. And I think that the FFI will be much better. But yeah, I think that might be feasible.
Because sometimes generating these, there's a lot of the redundant type of work that so it's a lot of things that you would think would be good candidates for something like ChatGPT to automate with the proper oversight where it runs into problems. But it seems like it would be a significant leg up if you could use something like that. And of course, that would include perhaps any dialect of Lisp that might be out there, Scheme or Emacs Lisp or things like that. It could also be, they're close neighbors.
Yeah, and I just asked it. I know that Copilot, off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, I think Copilot supports currently 6 or 8 languages, and C and C++ are some of them, obviously Python and Java, and but Lisp is actually not among, if I remember correctly, the languages supported by Copilot. But yeah, well, Lisp or Scheme, let's just try it. Can you write a common Lisp program that does what? That scans a stream, a character stream for a keyword. Okay, so yeah, it looks like it can do that. Okay. Cool. Any other questions or comments? Has anybody tried ChatGPT or any other tool with HDF5, and what were your experiences? No? I mean, to me, yeah, it looks like a fantastic thing. Again, is it helpful at this point for library development? I don't think so. Might it be helpful with understanding HDF5 library source code? Perhaps. I haven't really spent any time with that. If you can find a reasonably self-contained piece of code that doesn't contain too many macros and in that way sort of external references, that probably would be okay. Or if you, for example, let's say you ask ChatGPT to write you a simple library to manipulate B trees in C, and then you put that side by side with the B tree. Well, there are actually 2 versions of B tree code in the HDF5 library now, and you put that side by side, I think you would be able to see similarities, although, yeah, there is sort of a vanilla B tree and then sort of a more refined version of B tree that we use. But yeah, so it's early days, I think, for digging into the code of a library. But then of course, yeah, you want to work in the context of a project. So something like VS Code or whatever your preferred editor is, Visual Studio. And then there's Copilot integration, for example, for both VS Code and Visual Studio. And then you can sort of converse with your assistant about your code base. And it will then, on the project level, let's say, have that contextual awareness and history. And yeah, maybe over time, that can be really productive. But sort of out of the cold, it's early days. It's not quite there yet. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Yeah, it is exciting. It's really amazing. And then most of you have probably seen things like, I mean, forget about HDF5, summarizing texts providing a synopsis. I think they start introducing now, I haven't activated it yet, here on my account. I think there are plugins now available for, I don't know why I don't see it here. You can have plugins, for example, for PDFs, for including videos. So it can, apparently, it can analyze videos. And you can also have, I think, images. I mean, yeah, pretty much anything that can be done in bytes can be analyzed and sort of introduced into the conversation. I think it's also early days. I played a little bit with just copying and pasting a piece of code into a question. But that's relatively tedious. I mean, you use sort of the markdown triple backtick opening and closing to introduce a piece of code. That's okay, but it's not pretty. And yeah, but that works. And yeah, so, but it's certainly a tool. I mean, I use it probably not every day, but several times a week, and probably I use it more and more as I discover more things, and almost to the point that, yeah, you can use your favorite search engine and get 10,000 hits, most of which are irrelevant, or ask ChatGPT and get something that definitely needs a lot of scrutiny, but is often a much, much better starting point than yeah, what you get from search engines in general. And any other questions, thoughts? Yeah, Laurie pointed out that right, we accept presentation proposals for HUG 23 through June 30th, and the registration is open. So definitely we want everybody to be there, or as many of you to be there. And yeah, it's going to be a special event. 25 years of HDF5. We have people there. We will have people there who were there from the very beginning, and yeah, and it's just going to be great to be in person and have that more direct contact rather than colorful pixels on a screen. Okay, unless there's anything else, I don't want to take too much of your time. Thanks for coming. And I forgot, who do we have up next? John Reedy?
Dana.
Or
It'll be Dana.
Oh, Dana? Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.